He said, "You belong in storage." So I let them put me there, while I bought 47% of their company behind the scenes. "Hi, I'm Emma." They thought I was the family failure, just a quiet consultant. But today, I walked into that boardroom and took back everything. Ever been underestimated by your own family? Tell me, what would you have done in my place? They didn't say my name. "Consultants here," someone murmured near the elevator. I didn't flinch, just shifted the strap of my laptop bag and kept walking. The air inside the Sullivan Holdings tower always smelled like tension, masked with coffee. Today was no exception. That same burnt drip from the communal pot near reception lingered like an afterthought. I used to drink from that pot too once, back when I had a real title, a real desk, a corner office, and a last name people respected. Now I was the consultant. I stopped just before the main boardroom. The reception table sat slightly off-center from the hallway's polished tiles. My nameplate, printed on thin cardstock, not engraved like the others, had been placed carelessly on a side table near a stack of quarterly reports no one would read. It was crooked. A receptionist glanced at me, then away, like she'd been trained to avoid eye contact with anyone not wearing a badge. I had one, of course, but it read "External Visitor" with Emma S. typed in sans serif. Not even my full name. That's how much they thought I. Rachel appeared before I could breathe in fully. "Oh, there you are," she said, voice sweet and cold all at once. "We've got limited space in the conference room today, so I'm going to ask you to wait in storage 3. It's just down the hall." 3. Her red heels clicked twice before she turned, not waiting for me to respond. That was Rachel's style. Always 10 steps ahead in her mind and 2 behind in compassion. I followed silently, my shoes making no sound on the marble. I knew the way already, of course. I had helped design the original floor plan for this building when I was 25. That same year, my father decided I was too emotional to lead mergers and acquisitions. He preferred Rachel. She looked like the brochure of the family business, glossy, prepared, bulletproof. As I passed the boardroom door, I could hear laughter. Noah's, loud and performative. He was charming, no doubt about it, until the numbers ran red. Then the mask cracked. Storage room 3 hadn't changed in 5 years. Same flickering fluorescent light above the printer, no one fixed. Same dented filing cabinets, no one opened. Same faint scent of toner and something like lemon cleaner, long since faded. I sat in the lone metal chair by the wall. It wobbled. Dust bloomed up as I set down my bag. I didn't sigh. That would be giving the room too much dignity. Instead, I pulled out my laptop and logged into the encrypted dashboard. The screen blinked alive, showing the Sterling & Company board summary. At the top, a message from my assistant. "Green is in the building. Ownership now at 47%. Board proxies confirmed. Legal team standing by." I let the corner of my mouth rise just a little. Outside this room, my family was preparing to pitch Thomas Green, the biggest potential investor they'd spoken to in a decade. They didn't know he was already mine. I glanced around the room again. Broken printer, old quarterly reports with faded covers, a coffee mug from some Bring Your Child to Work Day event, chipped at the rim. Someone had left a half-eaten granola bar near the window. "Perfect staging," I murmured. This room was a metaphor wrapped in beige drywall. On the far wall, a frame hung slightly askew. The photo inside was sun-faded but familiar. The original Sullivan Holdings board. My father, 2 uncles, a founding investor, and in the back, slightly off-center, stood my mother, Linda Sterling. Her maiden name, now the name of my company. She was the only one not smiling in that photo. I remembered her telling me once, "Never grin in a room full of liars." I was 13. I hadn't understood then. I did now. I looked at her eyes, calm, direct, defiant. I didn't touch the frame, just met her gaze for a moment, then returned to my screen. Another ping. An image appeared. Rachel, smiling like a polished fox, shaking hands with Thomas Green outside the boardroom. Her caption read, "Welcome, Mr. Green. Excited to explore this partnership." My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I typed 2 words, "Let her speak." Sent. The window to the left buzzed faintly with morning wind. Somewhere beyond it, the sound of the city waking up drifted in. Delivery trucks, car horns, a dog barking across the plaza. Uptown Charlotte was busy, clean, humming with order. Inside this storage room, time felt paused. I pulled out a folder from my briefcase, labeled cleanly in bold lettering, Sterling and Company, Final Integration Plan. I set it carefully on the table, centered it with intention, then adjusted my nameplate to sit beside it. Still crooked, but now deliberate. They thought I was here to observe. They were wrong. They didn't say my name. "Consultants here," someone murmured near the elevator. I didn't flinch, just shifted the strap of my laptop bag and kept walking. The air inside the Sullivan Holdings tower always smelled like tension, masked with coffee. Today was no exception. That same burnt drip from the communal pot near reception lingered like an afterthought. I used to drink from that pot too once, back when I had a real title, a real desk, a corner office, and a last name people respected. Now I was the consultant. I stopped just before the main boardroom. The reception table sat slightly off-center from the hallway's polished tiles. My nameplate, printed on thin cardstock, not engraved like the others, had been placed carelessly on a side table near a stack of quarterly reports no one would read. It was crooked. A receptionist glanced at me, then away, like she'd been trained to avoid eye contact with anyone not wearing a badge. I had one, of course, but it read External Visitor with Emma S. typed in sans serif. Not even my full name. That's how much they thought I. Rachel appeared before I could breathe in fully. "Oh, there you are," she said, voice sweet and cold all at once. "We've got limited space in the conference room today, so I'm going to ask you to wait in storage 3. It's just down the hall." 3. The day I left Sullivan Holdings, no one tried to stop me. Not my father, not Rachel, not Noah, and certainly not the board. I remember the sound of the conference room door clicking behind me, sharp, final, almost satisfying. I remember carrying nothing but my mother's old laptop and a stack of reports that nobody read, except to mock. The summer sun outside was brutal, but inside me, it felt cold. That morning, I had spent over an hour preparing a presentation on labor conditions in our overseas factories and the dozens of environmental compliance violations flagged by internal audits. I'd reviewed it with legal, ethics, and even quietly with Uncle Pete, who nodded in silent encouragement. I walked into that boardroom thinking the truth might matter. I was wrong. The moment I said the word violation, my father raised a hand, not to stop me, but to cut me off. "These are inconveniences," he said, glancing at his Rolex. "They slow down progress." "They're illegal," I replied, my voice shaking but clear. Rachel rolled her eyes. "Emma, we've already had compliance sign-offs on most of this." "Don't be dramatic," Noah added with a smirk. "If you're looking for a cause, Habitat for Humanity might be hiring." I turned to my father. I needed him to say something different. He didn't. I stood there for a long moment, trying to understand what had broken. Then I realized nothing had. It had always been like this. So I closed my laptop. I picked up my mother's folder, the one she used to carry when she led sustainability audits before they pushed her aside too, and I walked out. No one followed me. By the end of that week, I had signed a lease for a tiny office above a bakery in Noda, Charlotte's most eclectic neighborhood. It smelled like sugar and ambition. The floors creaked. The air conditioner wheezed. The coffee came from a local vendor who knew my name by the second day. I painted the walls myself, bought secondhand chairs, and installed corkboards with thumbtacks like I was still in college. And I named it Sterling and Company. Not Sullivan, Sterling. My mother's name. The one they never said out loud after she died. The trust fund she had left me, untouched by Dad, sealed by legal iron, was enough to fund the first year. I didn't take a salary. I paid my first 2 employees more than I earned. They were scrappy, fresh out of grad school, full of conviction and caffeine. We shared 1 bathroom, 1 printer, and a dream. Uncle Pete stopped by one afternoon with a sealed folder from Mom's estate. "She meant to show you this when you turned 30, he said. "I think now's the time." Inside were early blueprints, sustainability protocols, notes scribbled in her looping cursive. a line that made me stop breathing for a second. If we're going to build wealth, we should do it without burying the world in the process. I pinned it to the wall. For months, we worked 12, 14-hour days. Our kombucha budget outpaced our paper supply. We ate Carolina takeout 3 times a week and celebrated landing clients with bubble tea and off-brand sparkling water. And yet, none of it felt like struggle. It felt like building, from nothing, with purpose. Sterling grew slowly. 1 client became 3, then 7, then 20. We didn't take shortcuts. We didn't sell out. We walked away from deals that didn't align with our values. We won quiet victories in industries that had never heard the words ethical audit before. Eventually, I started buying shares in Sullivan Holdings. Not directly, of course. That would have raised flags. I created holding companies, layered ownership, used legal channels no one in my family would bother tracing. They never imagined I'd care enough to watch them, but I did, because I knew what was coming. 2 years in, a former Sullivan staffer named Elena knocked on our office door. "I heard you were doing things differently," she said. "I didn't believe it. Then I read your supplier code. No NDAs, no silence clauses, just clear language about doing right." I hired her on the spot. At one of our all-team check-ins, I asked if anyone had ideas for redesigning our supplier audit process. Instead of blank stares, I got 4 hands raised and a shared spreadsheet already in progress. These people weren't burned out. They were lit up. Then came the day I met with Thomas Green. We'd been circling each other for months. He, the legacy investor with a reputation for caution, me, the new face with an invisible history. We met at a cafe halfway between our offices. He ordered black coffee. I got mint tea. "I've seen your filings," he said, tapping his phone. "Impressive margins for an ethical firm." "We believe ethics scale," I replied. He smiled. "Sullivan said that too 10 years ago. Then they scaled back the ethics." I said nothing. He leaned forward. "What makes you different?" I didn't hesitate. I still answer to my mother. He blinked, then nodded. That was the moment it became real. We signed the partnership agreement a week later. Back in my new office, now 2 floors above the bakery, I looked out over Charlotte's skyline. Sterling's logo glowed softly on the building next to ours. A few blocks away, I could see the top of the Sullivan Tower, its windows darkened by dusk. "You built the walls," I whispered, not without emotion. "I just found the doors." Behind me, a light flickered on as one of my analysts stayed late. Again. I made a mental note to send her home with dinner, because I hadn't built this to prove them wrong. I built it to prove Mom right. From behind the thin walls of storage room 3, I heard Rachel begin her pitch. Her voice was sharp, polished, riding on years of practiced performance and surface-level confidence. "We believe that the proposed partnership will offer exponential growth," she said, her tone rehearsed to the syllable. "Our projected ROI exceeds industry benchmarks. We've streamlined operations in preparation for expansion." It was the same pitch I'd seen a dozen times in drafts, the same proposal we, at Sterling, had already rejected. Twice. I glanced at my phone where Thomas Green's last text blinked unread. "Want me to play along? Or detonate early?" I'd replied an hour ago. Let her talk. Then shut it down. He was keeping his word. I turned down the brightness on my laptop screen. The file labeled Sullivan Takeover Documents Final.pdf was already open. 17 pages, all signed, all legal, all irreversible. There was a pause in Rachel's voice, a ripple in the silence. Then Green spoke. I couldn't hear his words, only the shift in energy that followed. It moved like a wave, a subtle gasp, then the scraping of chairs, the shuffle of bodies leaning forward. I rose from my wobbly chair and adjusted my blazer. The hallway outside the storage room was oddly quiet, like the entire floor had stopped breathing. As I walked toward the boardroom, the corridor lights flickered once, then steadied. A glitch in the system, or something more poetic. I wasn't sure. I paused at the boardroom doors. They were partially closed, but not enough to muffle Green's next words. "I'm not here to discuss that proposal. I'm here to meet with the CEO of Sterling and Company Silence." Then someone, Noah, I was almost sure, whispered, "You've got to be kidding." I pushed open the doors. The room turned toward me in a synchronized flurry of confusion. Slide decks flickered mid-animation. Someone's pen clattered to the table. The catered breakfast trays sat untouched, the muffins stiffening in the air-conditioned chill. Rachel's face was still mid-expression, caught somewhere between confident and cracked. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. "Good morning," I said, walking slowly but without hesitation. Apologies for being late. I was told to wait in storage. I could feel Green smiling behind me, though I didn't turn to confirm it. Henry's brows knitted into a tight line. "Emma," he said, his voice louder than it needed to be. "What are you doing here?" I smiled gently, as if answering a polite dinner question. "Attending the meeting. After all, I believe we're discussing a strategic partnership with one of my companies." Murmurs buzzed like static. A few board members began glancing at their phones. Noah leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Wait, Sterling is yours?" I walked to the center of the room, slowly placing my briefcase on the table. The sound of the metal latches clicking open was sharper than I expected. I pulled out the first folder, laying it flat. "I founded Sterling and Company 5 years ago," I said, voice steady. "Today we own 47% of Sullivan Holdings, acquired legally, transparently, and carefully. We also hold significant stakes in several of your vendors, clients, and partner organizations." Rachel took a step forward, her heels clicking like a nervous metronome. "That's not possible." "It is," Green replied from his seat. "She was very thorough." Henry looked like someone had drained all color from his face. "You planned this," he said, barely above a whisper. "All of it." I met his gaze, quiet and clear. "No, Dad. You did. The day you stopped listening." Someone in the corner gasped softly. A phone buzzed. A board member murmured, "Check the ticker." Sterling just filed a majority ownership notice. I moved toward the projector remote, clicked once. The presentation slide changed, no longer Rachel's glossy pitch deck, but a simple chart showing Sullivan's 5-year decline. Next slide, employee attrition rates. Then, environmental citations. Rachel's mouth finally moved. "This isn't how we do things." "That's exactly the problem," I cut in, calm but firm. "This isn't just about profits. It's about people, practices, values." Noah stood now, arms still crossed. "You could have said something. Talk to us." I tilted my head slightly. "You mean, like the day I brought you reports and was told to try charity instead?" He flinched. I continued. "You dismissed me. Not just from the room, but from the possibility that I might one day matter. Today is simply accounting." Green chuckled under his breath. Henry sat down, slowly, as if gravity had doubled. His eyes stared blankly at the projection screen. I tapped the folder. "Inside is our integration proposal. Sterling doesn't want to destroy Sullivan. We want to clean it up, ethically, transparently, profitably, but on our terms." Someone near the back whispered, "We should hear her out." Someone else, "Stock's moving fast." Rachel finally spoke, quieter now. "And if we refuse?" I looked at her, not with anger, but with something softer, almost pity. "Then we continue to buy, one shareholder at a time, but I'd rather rebuild with you than over you." There was a long, still moment, not hostile, just silent. Then a single voice, an older board member I didn't recognize, broke the quiet. "Let's hear the offer." I opened the next folder. No one moved. Not Rachel, not my father, not even the intern who always nodded too much, as if agreement could be worn like a shield. For a moment, the only sound in the Sullivan Holdings boardroom was the faint hum of the projector fan and the soft tick of the wall clock, counting down the seconds before everything would shift. I stepped fully into the room, calm, measured. My heels made no sound on the polished floor. Across the table, Rachel stood frozen mid-sentence. Her pointer trembled slightly above the final slide of her proposal, the one she'd been so proud of. The numbers were wrong, the assumptions faulty, the partners already signed elsewhere. But she didn't know that yet. "Let's start this meeting over," I said, setting my briefcase on the table. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Mom used to say, "When people finally listen to you, don't raise your voice. Lower it." The more I spoke now, the quieter I became. I opened the case and slowly pulled out a single folder. The board members leaned in unconsciously, as though the folder might explain the impossible shift they were sensing. Inside were 3 documents: the final acquisition breakdown, the partnership index, and the revised board structure proposal. I laid them flat in the center. "We've confirmed ownership of 47% of Sullivan Holdings voting shares," I said, eyes moving from Noah to Rachel to my father, "and have secured proxy agreements from key stakeholders. We hold majority control." A ripple moved through the room. Phones were picked up. Texts were checked. One board member, Mr. Abrams, frowned at his screen and whispered, "She's not bluffing." Green remained seated, still and observant, as if this moment had been waiting for him too. He gave the slightest nod, just enough to anchor the room in reality. "And," he added smoothly, "Sterling and Company now manages or directly controls partnerships with 5 of your top 7 client accounts, including the Maxwell Group, whose contract was misrepresented in your last proposal." Rachel's hand dropped to her side, her posture wavering. "That's not possible," she said, her voice thin. "It's not only possible," Green replied, his tone firm. "It's necessary." I clicked the projector remote. The next slide replaced Rachel's. It wasn't colorful or dramatic, just a clean set of bar graphs showing the company's decline over the past 5 years. Revenue erosion, employee churn, legal penalties, a visual obituary. Then came the report excerpts: OSHA citations, EPA warnings, offshore labor audits, all of which had been buried in footnotes until now. A few pages bore my father's signature. That detail wasn't lost on the room. Henry sat stiffly, his hands clasped. "We can handle this internally," he said, his voice low, attempting to reclaim ground. "You had 5 years," I said softly, clicking to the final slide. "Now it's external." There was no triumph in my tone, only fact, no dramatics, no gloating. I hadn't come to tear them down. I'd come to hand them a way out. I opened a second folder and slid it across the table to Henry. "This is Sterling's proposal," I said. "We're prepared to invest $200 million in capital. In exchange, Sterling will assume full operational control. The Sullivan name can remain, if the practices do not." Henry stared at the folder, as if it might bite. "You're offering a buyout," Noah said flatly. "I'm offering a future," I replied. "One based on sustainability, compliance, dignity, for employees, for clients, for this company's legacy." Rachel's hands were clenched into fists now, but her voice faltered. "That's not how this works." "It is now," I said, and looked at her, not with judgment, but with quiet resolve. "You were taught to believe control meant silence. Those ethics were liabilities. I'm telling you, they're leveraged." A long pause followed. One of the board members, a woman I barely remembered, leaned forward and spoke quietly, almost to herself. "Honestly, I'm relieved." It landed like a crack in the armor. Another member echoed, "We've needed a reset for years." I turned to Henry. His shoulders had begun to sag. The man who once filled boardrooms with charisma and intimidation now looked smaller, heavier. His fingers touched the folder. He didn't open it yet. "If I sign this," he said slowly, voice hoarse, "what happens to us?" I looked at him, not as a daughter, not as an opponent, but as someone offering a hand across a fractured divide. "That's up to you." The room exhaled together, like they'd all been holding their breath. At that moment, I didn't feel powerful. I felt responsible. And that felt right. No cameras, no press, just 3 pens and silence. The boardroom no longer buzzed. Whatever tension had once filled the room had settled into something heavier, acceptance maybe, or the pause before a long exhale. Outside, the skyline of Charlotte glowed amber, the sun dropping behind buildings we used to pretend we owned in spirit, if not in shares. Inside, the long conference table sat beneath low light, the coffee now cold, muffins uneaten. A stack of papers lay in front of my father. Uncle Pete used to say, "The strongest takeovers don't come with noise. They come with stillness." I didn't understand what he meant until now. I watched Henry Sullivan, CEO, patriarch, architect of empire, stare at the final page of the integration agreement. The legal team had already left. No one from PR remained. Just us. His hand hovered above the pen for a second, then dropped. He didn't look at me when he signed. His signature, once forceful and sweeping, now seemed like a tired breath. The ink bled slightly into the fiber of the paper. A tremor betrayed itself in his knuckles. He slid the folder down the table. Rachel sat to his left, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her usual glossy exterior had dulled. No foundation could hide the exhaustion under her eyes. She looked at our father's signature, then glanced at me. She picked up the pen. No speech, no argument. Just a quiet acknowledgement of the end of one chapter and the start of something uncertain. She signed. When she passed the folder to Noah, it hesitated in the air for just a second longer than it had between the others. He was leaning back, arms crossed, jaw set. I expected resistance, maybe one last quip, but none came. He looked at me. I met his eyes, not with challenge, but with honesty. Then, wordlessly, he took the pen and wrote his name. The silence that followed wasn't victory. It wasn't grief either. It was something deeper, an emotional neutral zone, like when you realize a storm has passed and now you're just wet and standing. Then came the softest sound, a door opening. Uncle Pete stepped in, wearing his usual wrinkled blazer, carrying no briefcase, no papers, just himself and a quiet smile. He walked straight to me and wrapped his arms around my shoulders. He didn't say a word. His hug was warm and firm, and for a moment I let myself lean into it. No strategy, no posture, just a niece in the arms of the only adult who never asked her to be anyone else. "Pete," Henry said, his voice scratchy, "you knew." "I hoped," Pete replied simply. "I hoped she'd come back better." Rachel let out something between a laugh and a sigh. It was the first real sound she'd made since signing. Pete turned to her, gave a gentle nod, then looked at Noah, who avoided eye contact but didn't leave. Later, in the hallway, the echo of our footsteps was the only sound. "I didn't know," Rachel said, her voice quiet. "How far you'd come, what you'd built." I stopped walking and turned to her. "Neither did I said, "until now." We stood in silence. The elevator dinged down the hall. Green was waiting for me on the rooftop balcony. The evening breeze had picked up slightly, and he was leaning on the railing, his phone still lit from stock updates. "Up 9%, he said, without looking up. "The market believes in redemption, apparently." I chuckled, the sound surprising me. "I think they believe in math. The redemption's just a bonus." We looked out at the skyline together. From this angle, you could see the edge of the old Sullivan building, the name still on the top for now. Its windows were lit, but not all of them. It looked quieter. "How's your father?" Green asked. "Tired," I replied, "but not crushed. I think that matters." He nodded. When I returned to the main floor, the hallway was empty except for a small figure near the corner. Rachel's son, Eli, probably 6, sitting cross-legged with a tablet in his lap. He looked up when I approached. "You're the boss now?" he asked innocently. I crouched to his level. "Sort of," I said with a smile, "but mostly I just try to make things work better." He nodded thoughtfully, then went back to his tablet. As I stood, Rachel appeared at the elevator. "Eli's why I want to learn," she said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "He deserves better." I studied her face. Less makeup now, more skin, more reality. "We all do," I said. She nodded, and the elevator doors closed between us. Back in my office, the lights were dimmed. I walked to the far wall where a small plaque had just been mounted. Black frame, white lettering, no logos, no name, just one line. Built on the values she lived by. I ran my fingers gently across it. It didn't need a signature. Some people think power means sitting in the highest seat. I know better. It's a bright morning in spring, the kind that smells like hope even before you open the windows. On the top floor of the new Sterling and Company headquarters, everything feels a little too quiet for a weekday. Not empty, just peaceful. The walls are soft white. The floors reclaimed wood. Ferns and fiddle leaf figs stretch lazily toward the sunlight. A rooftop garden hums above us, bees drifting between basil and lavender. There's a framed photo near my desk, one from my first team at Sterling, all of us holding styrofoam takeout and laughing like we'd just invented something. There are no plaques, no corner nameplates, no brass eagles or oil paintings. Just family photos, a mug that says ethics are profitable, and a small carved paperweight that Pete gave me last Christmas. Stay curious. Stay kind. 1 year. That's how long it's been. 1 year since the folder slid across the Sullivan boardroom table. Now it's a strategy meeting, not a war room. And my siblings, yes, still my siblings, are sitting at the same table, not as opponents, but partners. Rachel leans forward, presenting the final draft of our new parental leave policy. She speaks plainly, confidently. Eli, now 7, sits quietly in the corner of the room, bouncing a soft rubber ball against the wall. He's careful not to make noise, but every now and then he glances up at his mom and smiles when she says something smart. She always notices. Rachel says, "We've benchmarked this against the best in class. But I think we can afford to do better, especially for part-time workers." Noah, now wearing glasses I suspect he only puts on when he wants to look reflective, adds a note on small business outreach. "The mentoring groups in East Charlotte are requesting more funding," he says. "We've had 3 startups get seed funding this quarter. They're citing us in their mission statements." Across the table, Henry sits quietly. He doesn't lead anymore. He doesn't interrupt. He just listens. Something I never thought I'd see. "This," he says after a long pause, "feels right." That's all. And it's enough. When the meeting ends, there's no applause, no declarations, just chairs shifting, papers gathering, voices soft and content. Rachel walks over to Eli, ruffles his hair. Noah picks up his tablet and steps aside to call one of his mentees. Dad lingers, not in authority, but in observation. I stay behind. The room empties. In the far corner, tucked near the curved glass wall that overlooks Charlotte's skyline, sits the chair. It's blue, older than anything else in the building, cleaned, reupholstered, but still a little faded at the arms. The chair Mom used to sit in, back when her office was nothing more than a windowless converted storage space with a rattling space heater and a kettle that never fully boiled. When I was 12, I used to sit on the floor by her legs as she worked. Her tea would go cold while she drafted reports no one read, but she never raised her voice. She didn't need to. "This isn't power," she once told me, one arm draped over the backrest. "It's presence. No one ever uses that chair. It isn't sacred. It's just not ours to occupy. It watches, and that's enough." I walk over now and sit beside it, legs crossed, palms resting on my knees. The skyline beyond is soft with morning haze. Down below, the Sullivan building is still there, smaller, but standing. I whisper, "You're still here. And now, so am I." A breeze from the ventilation brushes the edge of my blazer. Somewhere in the building, someone laughs. Real, full laughter. It rises and fades. That used to be rare. I pull out my phone and check my inbox. Most messages are what you'd expect. Quarterly summaries, a media inquiry, a sustainability audit approval. But one email catches me. From Pete's subject. She'd be proud. I don't open it. I don't need to. I just stare at it for a moment, then let the phone fall gently into my lap. I sit back, letting my shoulders drop, and I breathe. Not the breath of someone holding tension, not the one you take before speaking hard truth. This is the breath you take when you realize something is over and something new has begun. Before I leave the room, I walk over to the wall beside my desk. There's a small frame, matte black with no logo, just words, built on the values she lived by. It doesn't say her name. It doesn't need to, because this company, this future, carries her every word, every choice, every time she chose to stay in the room even when no one listened. I stand beside the old chair for a while longer, then I turn back toward the hallway, and I think, they put me in a storage room, but I built a company where no one gets stored away ever again. Some chairs aren't meant to be sat in. They're meant to remind us of who came before and the quiet strength they carried. Today, I no longer need the highest seat to feel whole. I've learned that power isn't in taking control. It's in choosing compassion when you could choose revenge. Families don't heal all at once, but if we keep showing up for each other, healing has a way of finding its place. If you've ever been placed in a quiet corner or underestimated, know this: your worth isn't where they put you. It's what you build after they do. If this story touched something in you, I'd be honored to hear what part stayed with you. Maybe about a chair, a memory, or someone who once believed in you when no one else did.